Corporation Counsel, Michael Cardozo, and Deputy Mayors Kaz Holloway and Howard Wolfson. At 1 o'clock this morning, the New York City Police Department and the owners of Zuccotti Park notified protesters in the park that they had to immediately remove tents, sleeping bags, and other belongings, and must follow the park rules if they wish to continue to use it to protest. Many protesters peacefully complied and left. At Brookfield's request, members of the NYPD and Sanitation Department assisted in removing any remaining tents and sleeping bags. This action was taken at this time of the day to reduce the risk of confrontation in the park and to minimize disruption to the surrounding neighborhood. Protesters were asked to temporarily leave the park while this occurred and were told that they would be free to return to the park once Brookfield finished cleaning. We are now ready to reopen the park, but understand that there is a court order, which we have not yet actually received, enjoining us from enforcing Brookfield's rules, and so the park will remain closed until we can clarify that situation. But I want to stress that our intention was to reopen the park and to let people go in and express their First Amendment rights to protest or their First Amendment rights to just peacefully enjoy the park and say nothing. In the future, protesters and the general public will be welcome there to exercise their First Amendment rights and otherwise enjoy the park, but will not be allowed to use tents, sleeping bags, or tarps, and going forward must follow all park rules. The law that created Zuccotti Park required that it be open for the public to enjoy for passive recreation 24 hours a day. Ever since the occupation began, that law has not been complied with, as the park has been taken over by protesters, making it unavailable to anyone else. From the beginning, I've said that the city has two principal goals: guaranteeing public health and safety and guaranteeing the protesters' First Amendment rights. But when those two goals clash, the health and safety of the public and our first responders must be the priority. And that is why several weeks ago the city acted to remove generators and fuel that posed a fire hazard from the park. Over time, I've become increasingly concerned, as had the owners of the park Brookfield properties, that the occupation was coming to pose a health and fire safety hazard to the protesters and to the surrounding community. We have been in constant contact with Brookfield, and yesterday they requested that the city assisted in enforcing the no sleeping and camping rules in the park. But make no mistake, the final decision to act was mine and mine alone. The park has become covered in tents and tarps, making it next to impossible to safely navigate for the public and for first responders who are responsible for guaranteeing public safety. The dangers posed were evident last week when an EMT was injured as protesters attempted to prevent him and several police officers from helping a mentally ill man who was menacing others. As an increasing number of large tents and other structures were erected, these dangers increased. It has become increasingly difficult even to monitor activity in the park to protect the protesters and the public, and the proliferation of tents and other obstructions created an increasing fire hazard that had to be addressed. Now, some have argued to allow the protesters to stay in the park indefinitely. Others had suggested that we just wait for winter and hope the cold weather drove the protesters away. But inaction was not an option. We could not wait for someone in the park to get killed or to injure another first responder before acting. Others have cautioned against action because enforcing our laws might be used by some protesters as a pretext for violence. But we must never be afraid to insist on compliance with our laws. Unfortunately, the park was becoming a place where people came not to protest, but rather to break laws, and in some cases to harm others. There have been reports of businesses being threatened and complaints about noise and unsanitary conditions that have seriously impacted the quality of life for residents and businesses in this now thriving neighborhood. The majority of protesters have been peaceful and responsible, but an unfortunate minority has not been. And as the number of protesters has grown, this has created an intolerable situation. No right is absolute, and with every right comes responsibility. The First Amendment gives every New Yorker the right to speak out, but it does not give anyone the right to sleep in a park or otherwise take it over to the exclusion of others, nor does it permit anyone in our society to live outside the law. There is no ambiguity in the law here. The First Amendment protects speech. It does not protect the use of tents and sleeping bags to take over a public space. Protesters have had 2 months to occupy the park with tents and sleeping bags. Now they will have to occupy the space with the power of their arguments. Let me conclude by thanking the NYPD, the FDNY, and the Department of Sanitation for their professionalism earlier this morning. I should also note that last night I spoke with Governor Cuomo to inform him of our course of action, and he offered any help if we thought it was needed. Thank you all, and I will be happy to take a question or two, sir.
Mayor, can you just go over with us, was there one or two incidents here just in the last couple of days that was an impetus to take this action? And also, given what you said about the First Amendment rights of these folks, do you feel badly at all that you had to take this action?
No, because I don't feel bad, because they can come right back in. At least they could have until a few minutes ago when we believe an order was issued, which we will go to court this morning to clarify. Before this order was issued, we had every intent to let them right back in and to let them protest. I think you have to distinguish between what we're trying to do and what was done in many other places. In many places, they were prevented from going back in after the safety conditions were improved to protest. Quite the contrary. Here, we welcome them back in. If they want to protest, they have a right to do so. Brookfield Properties has a legal obligation, an agreement with the city to let them, and has said that they are happy to have them there to express their views. But that is not the same as taking over the park so that other people cannot get in and express opposing views or similar views or no views whatsoever. We do know of one incident with an EMS worker and police officers the other day. There have been a number of everyday small either accusations which are hard to prove when the police can't even get there to see what's really going on. And that's one of the reasons why we have laws on the books that require access for first responders and require a level of protection that the city's obligated to provide. Yes, sir.
Mayor, a few days ago you said you can't even hear the protests a block away.
That's correct.
That they were generally following the...
That's correct.
What happened in the last few days?
It's what has a block or two away, generally speaking, and there's always exceptions. There were allegations of people defecating in alleys. We quite honestly have a lot of police out there, and to the best of our knowledge couldn't find anybody doing it. The noise a block or two away was certainly not offensive. You probably couldn't hear it. When the protesters marched someplace, generally they did comply with instructions from the police department how to do that legally. But at the site, they were violating Brookfield's property rights, and at the site, the safety and health conditions became intolerable. So the difference, when I talked about away from it, yes, that's true. But it's at the site, which is where we acted last night, or early this morning, and the reason for it was what was occurring at the site. Yes, yes.
Mayor, I'm just wondering, as they re-enter, if they do re-enter today, will they be searched? Will their backpacks be searched?
We are going to reserve the right, as we do at big public events, to either on a random basis or if there's suspicion that they may be carrying something that's prohibited, whether it's at a parade, at a concert in a park, or here, on a random basis we would do that. They cannot carry in big objects, tents and other things to set up and recreate the situation that became so intolerable. Sir?
When is the park reopening?
We had planned to open it at 8 o'clock this morning. We even said to the police to start letting them in. About 50 people went in, is my understanding, and then we are told that this judge has issued a restraining order. I don't think, as of 2 minutes ago, we had not been served with the order yet, but because we think that there is an order out there, we have reclosed the park, and we are asking the 50 people to leave. But it was our intention to open it at 8 o'clock this morning. I can't hear.
If there's a restraining order, who's against and why are you closing the park?
The order was from a judge. We haven't seen the order. We haven't been served with it. The best course of action, we think, because there are laws in the books that we have to comply with, like security and safety and Brookfield's property rights. So we will go to court this morning, and it's our considered judgment that the best course of action is to leave it closed for the hour or two it takes to go to the park, because nobody wants to recreate a situation that, if the court does not rule that on appeal or the judge changes her mind, that we would have a similar kind of situation that would create a danger to public safety. Miss?
One question today, so we'll take a couple more.
Mr. Mayor, I wonder if you could talk to how long this operation was in the planning, how many police officers were involved, and if you could tell us about the arrest. Were there people?
There were, we think, about 200. I'll let Ray talk a little bit about it, but I think just under 200. Keep in mind, it's still early, and some arrests occurred off the site as opposed to on the site, so it's a question of definition. But there were people that left of their own accord. There were people that we gave them plenty of time to take their belongings. If they didn't take their belongings, the sanitation department, with the help of Brookfield, took them by truck. They're going to be up at 57th Street and the West Side Highway in a sanitation garage. If you had property that you didn't chose not to or didn't have a chance to remove, you can go there. You'll have to have identification, a photo ID. We'll identify the piece of property you think is yours. We'll tag it, and we'll wait and see if anybody else shows up also claiming ownership. And then in a day or so, we think we can pretty much straighten most of that out.
How long? What?
Ray, you want to talk a little bit about
Something about the operation, why you decided to go, the planning of it, how many police officers were involved?
Well, we try to stay away from specific numbers. There were several hundred police officers involved, obviously. We've had contingency plans to address the situation in the park for quite a while. They've been developed, they've been honed by our commanders, and so it was something that was just a question of implementing.
Yes, sir.
Can you speak about any possible injuries that happened during the arrest? I know Councilman Reed asked for.
If there were any, I think EMS provided medical assistance to 3 minor things and to a police officer who had heart palpitations, who I'm told is in the hospital and it seems to be doing okay. There was certainly no serious injuries that we are aware of. People that lay down on the ground, may have banged themselves, but I think there's no reports that I know of anything other than the kind of professionalism that you would expect from the world's greatest police department. Yes, sir.
Last night I witnessed numerous instances of credentialed media being prevented from doing the protest.
Yes.
Doing the protest eviction. Why did this happen?
The police department routinely keeps members of the press off to the side when they're in the middle of a police action. It's to prevent a situation from getting worse and to protect the members of the press who have the same rights as everybody else, for we have to provide protection, and we've done exactly that, sir.
Have you weighed the pros and the cons by prohibiting tenting, sleeping bags, and other ways for these protesters to stay warm? If they remain resolute to stay through the winter, what about the risk of the cold setting in and people?
Well, there's always a risk of people sleeping outdoors, and our health department worries about that. Actually, it comes to focus mostly when you find homeless. There's about 2,500 people, as you know, live on the streets of the city, way down from what it was 5 years ago, and it is actually a very low ratio, the lowest, I think, of any major city in the country, but we do worry about that. But that's not the issue here. We don't, as I said in my statement, we have an obligation to enforce the laws today to make sure that everybody has access to the park so everybody can protest. That's the First Amendment, and it's number one on our minds. We also have a similar, just as important obligation to protect health and safety of the people in the park. Way in the back, sir, yes.
Mayor, in the initial weeks of the protest, the police officers were actually taking patrols within the park and taking down structures or tarps or tents, and they stopped doing that. And I was wondering why that was done. Why did they not do that as they were appearing? Was there
It was really, we had delegated that job to Brookfield Properties people and to the sanitation department, and the police, I assume, just acted. If they had to remove people and they didn't know who was in the tent, they have to be able to get in there. But fundamentally, that was the division of labor, and I think, once again, you saw two city agencies and a little bit of the fire department through EMS working together, which is what you would expect them to do. Sir?
Mr. Mayor, I'm just curious, before the police commissioner goes along, I'm carrying a tent, I'm carrying an umbrella, I'm carrying a sleeping bag. Until I open it up, what right does the police department have to stop me from entering the park if I have to set this device?
Well, we could adopt that. Michael, you want to talk a little bit about that?
If there's reasonable suspicion that someone is going to violate the rules, the police have a right to inspect to be sure that the rules are not being violated. So if someone is bringing a tent on his or her into the park and the rules prohibit a tent being in the park, the police certainly have a right to say we don't want to do it, particularly in light of the history of which we're all aware.
Let me just finish by saying here, let me just remind everybody, New York City is the city where you can come and you can express yourself. We have a history going back to the founding of this city of being open and welcoming. And what was happening in Zuccotti Park was not that. It had developed into a situation which was prohibiting a lot of people from expressing their views. Assuming the judge's order gets vacated, assuming it exists and then gets vacated, people will have the opportunity to do that here in ways that I'm not sure they have in other cities. They have a right to be safe, and they have a right to say what they want to say, and they don't have a right to keep others from saying what they want to say or not saying anything. That's exactly what's at stake here, and that's exactly why we acted. And I just once again wanted to thank the uniform agencies of this city who performed exactly the ways you would expect them. They are well trained, they are well led, they are dedicated men and women who want to keep this city open, and that's exactly what they did. Thank you very much.
And you've been listening to Mayor Bloomberg speaking from City Hall, talking about his decision, and he was very clear that it was his decision, the final decision, to remove protesters from Zuccotti Park. And he said the rule for Zuccotti Park is really to enjoy passive recreation 24 hours a day, that there is no rule allowing people, while there is a rule, of course, allowing First Amendment rights, but not necessarily to allow you to live there in an encampment.
Right, and we should bring you up to date with what's happening right now. The mayor's intention, he said, was to reopen Zuccotti Park if the protesters would adhere to the rules at 8 o'clock. That has been stopped, at least temporarily, by a court order, which the city said it is still trying to clarify.
Right. There was a lot involved in whether or not, because he said he doesn't want then it on appeal to be changed and have to have people come in, leave, and that's already happened a little bit this morning. But he said a lot of this decision really revolved around the health and the safety of the general public.
That's right. And they said yesterday, Brookfield, they are the property owners, asked the city to insist in enforcing its rules which have been in place all along. As we look at Chopper 4 there, this is video of some of the protesters who have been evicted from the park now making their way through lower Manhattan, and the question now is where will they end up? Some have been at Foley Square, some had the intention of protesting at City Hall, some awaiting a return to Zuccotti Park as well. But with regard to Brookfield's decision asking the city to enforce its rules against camping and sleeping, but the mayor said in a statement, and he said in this press conference, the decision to take action was his alone. Police Commissioner Ray Kelly saying contingency plans had been in the works. They were executed overnight.
That's right. So far we're hearing about 200 arrests, but as the mayor said, some of the arrests occurred off-site, some within the park, so it's really hard to tell what happened where at this point. But from what we understand, 200 arrests, and he said it just became an issue where the public wasn't able to navigate safely through the park. He did mention a couple of times an EMS worker that had been injured trying to help a mentally ill person also in this park. So just compromising the health and safety of the protesters as well as people trying to move in and around this park.
Once again, these are live pictures from Chopper 4 of Lower Manhattan. You can see the protesters on the move. We want to go to Zuccotti Park itself, where the protesters were said to be about to re-enter the park at 8 o'clock. As we said, now that has been put on hold.
That's right. News 4's Erica Tarantel joins us live with the latest there. Erica.
Yeah, actually, Darlene and Michael, about 15 to 20 people were let into the park. We actually went into the park with these folks, and they sat down and expected they'd be able to not camp out because they didn't have the property that was taken from them. But they said they were there for the long haul. Then maybe 5 minutes later, everyone was asked to leave the park again. Of course, now that's been clarified a bit by the mayor, saying that a court order was issued, and although he hadn't had a chance to review it, they didn't want any extra confusion in terms of having a lot of people head into the park and then have to be removed once again. Obviously, we're right here across the street from Zuccotti Park, but if you can take a look at the park, it's difficult through the traffic, I know. It is completely cleared at this point. Police and riot gears still surrounding the park and people trying to go about their business, those working in Lower Manhattan. Meantime, I'd say maybe max 30 protesters with signs have been walking around the park, not at all trying to get back in, being very peaceful. The real action, of course, the dramatic events happened overnight. Take a look.
You will be subject to arrest. You're willing to die for the banks? I don't think so.
We're not leaving. So it was around 1 o'clock this morning when police in full force showed up here at the park with the charge of enforcing a temporary eviction. Flyers were handed out to protesters, announcements made over bullhorns, as you heard. But the most hardcore protesters did refuse to leave. Holdouts locked themselves together with bike locks, and some tied themselves to a tree. It wasn't until about 3:30 in the morning that the park was completely cleared of people. An estimated 70 people initially believed arrested in the park. As you heard the mayor say, the idea was to clear the park of property and clean it for health and safety purposes, then allow the protesters back in so they could exercise their First Amendment rights. Now, some of those who initially left the park willingly did try to re-enter, go back into the park overnight. An additional potentially 30 to 40 people were arrested at that point. Police have yet to release an exact number of people arrested, but as the mayor said, it could reach up to about 200 in total.
The announcements started coming. If you're going to go ahead and go. If you're going to stand and you're going to hold our ground, they're going to be in the kitchen area.
Now, there were some claims of brutality overnight. You heard the mayor say he was very proud of the police force, that there were no serious injuries that he was aware of. Again, you also heard that the press was held back at a distance, so it was very difficult to independently see if there was any abuse on the part of police. But again, the mayor said that is not his understanding at all. In terms of the future of today, again, our understanding is that a court order has been issued, and it's not clear if that court order would prohibit police from prohibiting people to bring in those tents and tarps and sleeping bags, so they don't want to let people in and then have to arrest them again or deal with a whole other scenario like they did overnight. So at this point, it is peaceful, and we're not expecting to have much action in terms of inside the park for a couple of hours. Our understanding is a hearing is set for about 11:30 this morning, so the protesters are kind of on hold at this point. Again, several have kind of gathered here, and some of them do have sleeping bags in tow, and I asked them if they were going to try to get back into the park with the sleeping bags. They said they were ready to walk around the park, lay down around the park. They do some kind of a tarp choreographed thing where they lift the tarps in the air. Other people said that they were planning to actually follow the rules and go back in without their property and hold out as long as they could. They said they were hoping for parkas and hand warmers, and that they were, again, planning to re-enter the park as soon as they are allowed to do so, if that in fact happens, and stay for the duration. We're live at Zuccotti Park this morning. Erica Tarantel, Darlene Michael, back to you.
Erica, we wanted to ask, and you touched upon this, but we wanted to stress, how is this impacting? This is one of the busiest parts of Manhattan. It's also one of the narrowest and most crowded parts of Manhattan. How is this impacting people getting around in the Wall Street area, in the financial district, with the trading day about to open in 40 minutes?
Well, driving down here, the traffic was really difficult. You can see there are barricades that have surrounded the park, and there are a number of police officers, so it's slow going, but people basically just have a very uncommon sight, but they are getting to where they need to go. Since there isn't a big mass of protesters, there aren't really people blocking the sidewalks or blocking the streets. The police have maintained a good sense of order here, so those who are trying to get to their business, it seems, have been able to do so.
All right, Erica Tarantel, thank you very much. Erica mentioned this court order, Michael, that we just got in front of us right now. It looks like a state judge has prohibited the defendants, in this case, the city, from prohibiting these protesters to go back into the park and enforcing the rules published after the occupation began. And these rules, we would imagine, were what Mayor Bloomberg was talking about, where you could come in and protest, but you can't live in an encampment or in a tent there.
Right, and the mayor basically saying the city wants to have a chance to contest this. They think they're going to be able able to do this over the course of the next couple of hours, and that's why they've not let people back in the park, because as you pointed out, they didn't want to have people go back in and then have to have them come out again, because the key element of the lawsuit as well as the restraining order is the ability to bring in the things that have marked this encampment, that being the tents, tarps, coolers, and other items. The mayor's saying they want to reserve the right to check backpacks, check objects, and keep them out of the park as per the rules of the park. No sleeping, no camping.
Exactly. All right. Well, right now we're going to check in on, well, protesters are waiting to re-enter Zuccotti Park. They've been moving throughout lower Manhattan. Kai Simonson's in Chopper 4 right now with a bird's eye view. Kai.
Well, Michael and Darlene, once again, good morning to you. Yeah, we are live at Chopper 4 over the corner of Broadway and Canal Street. This group originated up by Foley Square. Then they headed south on Park Row, right past City Hall, and there were actually a few of them, a handful of them, that had actually formed a human chain in front of one of the entrances to City Hall. They dispersed peacefully and then met up with this group that was heading southbound into the same area. They made a loop around City Hall and then came up Broadway, and now you can see them at the corner, like I said before, of Broadway and Canal. They made a left, and now they're heading presumably over toward the corner of 6th Avenue and Canal Street. They had said a little bit earlier that that's where they would be meeting up a little bit later on this morning, but everything is peaceful with the exception of just a few traffic tie-ups, really nothing else going on. You can see there toward the bottom end of your screen we have police officers that are shadowing them, shadowing their every move, but once again, thankfully things have been peaceful so far. Back and over to you.
Kai, just looking at the traffic there, and I guess we're going to Canal Street, it seems that it's moving.
Yeah, it is moving. I'm sure that people are slowing
anyway.
down as they come through this area just to get a look at what's going on. It's not every day that you come out of the Holland Tunnel and you're looking at hundreds, maybe even 1,000 people or so walking down the sidewalk. But with the exception of some rubbernecking through here, you know, there is a little bit of a delay, but other than that, really not a whole lot going on with regard to traffic.
And Kai, we see that they seem to be stopping there. Is there a lot of the stopping and sort of regrouping? It seems like somebody's leading the way. Is that what you see going on as well?
Yeah, these two guys in the red there toward the center part of your screen, actually more the guy with the red cap. Every once in a while, he'll stop the crowd and maybe say a couple of things to them, maybe, you know, whatever the plan is for crossing the next street. So it is very organized, and it looks like police really haven't been or had to get involved too much up to this point.
Now, you said it looked like it had been wrapped around a couple of blocks. If you had to give us your best guess, how many people would you say are out there?
You know, it's kind of hard to know for sure, but I would say somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 700 or 800 people. The crowd has grown just a little bit, it seems, since they left Foley Square, but it may be along the lines of what the crowd was originally, or had originally formed at Foley Square after Zuccotti Park, after the crowds were dispersed from Zuccotti Park. Then there was a little bit of a dispersal. I think some people splintered off into other groups, and now it seems that they've actually convened again in this group you see here.
And Kai, I know that they had sent out email alerts. They were meeting at, I think you said 6th Avenue. I can't really tell from what I'm looking at how close are they to their destination.
They're only about maybe 2 or 3 blocks away, so they're getting very, very close to that destination. There's a little park there. It's actually, if you're familiar with the Holland Tunnel, coming out of the Holland Tunnel, there's that circle that you come around. It's just to the north of that.
Kai, how is this impacting, because that area, when you come out of the Holland Tunnel, that's very congested when you turn on the Hudson or you try to go east. How is this impacting traffic coming out of the Holland Tunnel?
Well, there is some traffic coming, you know, down, that's Canal Street there. There is some traffic coming down Canal Street. It is causing some problems getting out of the Holland Tunnel. We'll try to get a handle on exactly how much of a delay there is. But, you know, given all the activity down here in the time of the morning, you would think it would be a lot worse. But there is some congestion down here, and you're definitely going to want to keep that in mind if you plan on heading through this area.
All right, Kai, we want to thank you. If you can hold on there. Darlene, we just have some further clarification as to how this temporary restraining order is going to be resolved. We understand there's a court hearing now at 11:30, so it would appear at this point Zuccotti Park is going to be closed for several hours now, at least 2 or 3 hours, when they begin that argument at 11:30 to see if this TRO, as known, does stand. And the question here, what will be allowed in the park? Will it be a reenactment or a replay of what we've had in the past, or will protesters be back in, but only allowed to bring themselves and, as the mayor said, their views and their thoughts, but not their tents, their backpacks, and their sleeping bags?
We shall see. This battle certainly continues throughout the morning. The Occupy Wall Street protesters have been removed from Zuccotti Park. Stay with News 4 for the latest developments out of Lower Manhattan. You can see the pictures of the overnight sweep on our website, NBCNewYork.com.